On a hot night in September 1983, a line of trucks pulled off the highway outside Alamogordo, New Mexico. They weren't carrying garbage. They were carrying millions of brand new video games, sealed, shrink-wrapped, never played. And their destination wasn't a store shelf. It was a hole in the ground. Workers crushed the cartridges, poured concrete over them, and walked away. For 30 years, people said it never happened. That it was a myth. A legend invented by angry gamers. It wasn't a myth. And the games in that hole are the tombstone of the single fastest collapse in entertainment history. Because 2 years earlier, this exact industry was the most profitable new business on the planet. So what buries a gold mine in the desert? Stay with me, because the answer isn't bad games. It's something far more dangerous, and it's a mistake companies still make today. To understand the fall, you have to feel the height. In 1977, a company called Atari put a machine in living rooms that did something no one had done at scale before. It let you change the game by changing a cartridge. One console. Endless games. It was the printing press of play. And it printed money. Across the country, arcades were exploding, in pizza parlors, gas stations, laundromats, and a single-hit cabinet could earn back its cost in quarters within weeks. Atari's real genius was to bottle that gold rush and sell it for the living room. By 1980, Atari was the fastest-growing company in American history. Its consoles sold by the tens of millions. A single game, a port of an arcade hit called Space Invaders, quadrupled the hardware sales by itself, because people bought the machine just to play that one thing at home. By 1982, the American video game industry was worth more than $3 billion a year. To put that in context, video games were out-earning Hollywood's box office and the entire pop music industry. Atari alone accounted for the majority of it. The company's parent, Warner Communications, watched this little electronics brand become its crown jewel, generating, at its peak, around half of Warner's total income. Think about that. A toy company was carrying a media empire. Engineers became rock stars. Money rained down. Atari was hiring by the thousands, opening new offices almost faster than it could fill them, and its leaders spoke as if the growth would simply never stop. And when money rains like that, a very specific kind of madness sets in. Everyone wants in, and nobody wants to be the one who says no. Here is the detail that changes the whole story. Atari built the machine. But it could not control what got made for it. Programmers who had built Atari's biggest hits looked at the company's profits, realized they were getting almost none of it, and walked out to form the first independent game studio. Atari sued to stop them. Atari lost. And that loss opened the floodgates. Legally, anyone could now make a game for Atari's console. At first, that sounds healthy. Competition. Choice. But watch what it actually did. Suddenly there was no gatekeeper. No one checking whether a game was finished, fun, or even functional. Dog food companies made games. Cereal brands made games. A famous one was an advert game for a chocolate candy. The market was flooded with hundreds of titles, and most of them were rushed, cynical, and bad. By 1982, dozens of companies were stamping out cartridges for a machine that only ever needed a handful of great ones. Store shelves that once held a curated dozen now sagged under 100 near-identical boxes, and nobody, not the buyer, not even the store clerk, could tell the gems from the garbage. And shoppers couldn't tell the difference on the shelf. Every box promised the world. So people bought a few stinkers, got burned, and slowly stopped trusting any of it. This is the quiet poison of a boom. When everyone can sell, quality becomes invisible, and trust, the real product, starts to rot. Retailers saw it first. Their shelves were drowning in unsold cartridges. But the worst single decision was still coming. And it had a movie attached to it. In the summer of 1982, the biggest film in the world was a story about a stranded alien and a boy who loved him. Atari's leadership wanted the video game on shelves by Christmas. There was just one problem: the deal to license it closed in late July. A normal game took 6 months to a year to build. The designer assigned to it was given roughly 5 weeks. 5 weeks to design, build, and finish a game for the most anticipated console release of the year. He did something almost heroic: he delivered a working game on an impossible deadline. But heroics can't beat arithmetic. The game was confusing, players fell into pits they couldn't escape, and the magic of the movie simply wasn't there. Now here is the number that should have stopped everything. Atari didn't manufacture a careful batch. They manufactured around 4 million copies for an install base that couldn't possibly absorb them. They sold maybe 1.5 million. Millions of cartridges came back from stores, unsold and unwanted. The famous landfill story you've heard? Those returns are a big part of what ended up in that desert hole. But, and this is the part people get wrong, E.T. didn't cause the crash. E.T. was a symptom. The disease was a whole industry that had stopped asking whether anyone actually wanted what it was making. The fever was about to break. 1983 is the year the floor disappeared. Retailers, sitting on mountains of unsellable games, slashed prices to dump inventory. A cartridge that launched at $35 sold for $5, then for $1. And once a customer learns that games end up in a bargain bin, why would they ever pay full price again? The whole pricing structure of the industry collapsed in months. Game makers who had expanded for endless growth suddenly had no buyers. They folded one after another. Studios that had been hiring in waves emptied out in a single season, and warehouses sat stacked to the ceiling with product worth, suddenly, almost nothing. And the numbers are brutal. The American video game market, worth more than $3 billion in 1982, fell to around $100 million by 1985. That is a collapse of roughly 97%. Not a downturn. Not a correction. A near-total wipeout in 24 months. Atari's parent company hemorrhaged money, losses so large they dragged down Warner's entire stock. The crown jewel had become an anchor. Newspapers wrote the obituary for the whole concept of home video games. Experts declared it a fad, like the hula hoop, that had simply run its course. The trucks rolled into the desert. The hole was filled. And as far as America was concerned, the story was over. Except it wasn't over. Because while the West Coast was burying its mistake, a company on the other side of the world was studying it. In Kyoto, Japan, a company best known for playing cards looked at the American wreckage and asked a sharper question than anyone in California had. They didn't ask, "How do we make games?" They asked, "Why did the market die?" And their answer was precise: trust. The market didn't die from too few games. It died from too many bad ones, with no way to tell them apart. So when Nintendo brought its console to the United States in the mid-1980s, it did 3 things that look almost obsessive, and they are the whole lesson of this story. First, it controlled the gate. A special chip inside the console meant that no game could run on it unless Nintendo approved it. The flood was over. Second, it created a guarantee, a literal seal printed on every approved box, promising the buyer this game met a standard. They were selling trust back to a burned customer. Third, it limited how many titles a publisher could release per year, forcing them to make their few games count instead of flooding shelves. Notice what Nintendo really did. It didn't invent better technology. It reinvented the gatekeeper that Atari had lost in a courtroom. It made scarcity and quality the product. And it worked so completely that within a few years, the industry everyone had pronounced dead was bigger than it had ever been. That same dead console business went on to sell tens of millions of machines and turned a whole generation of children into lifelong customers. The desert hole and the Kyoto playbook are 2 halves of one sentence: a market is only ever worth what its customers can trust. The hole in the desert wasn't the end of video games. It was the tuition. In 2014, a film crew got permission to dig up that landfill in Alamogordo. And there they were, crushed, sun-bleached, but real. The buried cartridges. The myth was true the whole time. People treat that hole as a funny piece of trivia, the time a company buried its own failure in the desert. But I think it's one of the cleanest business lessons ever written, and it's written in sand. A boom doesn't usually die from outside attack. It dies from the inside, from its own success removing the very limits that kept it honest. The moment anyone could sell anything, quality stopped mattering, and a market that can't signal quality is a market quietly digging its own grave. We see the same shape everywhere now. App stores drowning in clones. Shelves of nearly identical products. Feeds flooded with content nobody asked for. Every one of them is running the Atari experiment again, betting that infinite supply is the same thing as infinite demand. It never is. So next time you watch a business grow so fast it seems unstoppable, ask the quiet question Nintendo asked: who is guarding the gate? Because the trucks are always waiting, somewhere, for the day the answer is nobody. What modern boom do you think is heading for its own desert? Tell me in the comments, I read them.